Welcome to MindSpark Facts. Today we step into the minds of America's most dangerous convicts, not to glorify them but to understand the psychology that shaped them. What makes a human become a monster? Is evil born or built? If you love deep facts and mind-bending stories, hit subscribe right now and join our community, especially if you're part of the MindSpark Facts family. Search for MindSpark Facts, tap that red button, and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. This is Mind of a Monster. The birth of criminal psychology. For centuries, society viewed criminals through a single lens: punishment. But as prison populations grew and crime patterns evolved, psychologists began asking a deeper question. Why do certain people commit unimaginable acts while others don't? In the early 20th century, American criminologists shifted from seeing convicts as moral failures to viewing them as psychological case studies. The FBI later pioneered offender profiling through the Behavioral Science Unit, analyzing serial criminals, violent offenders, and eventually the most dangerous inmates in U.S. prisons. Psychologist Dr. Stanton Samnow, a leading criminal behavior researcher, rejected the idea that trauma alone creates criminals. His research suggested that many dangerous offenders share a pattern of self-justifying thinking, entitlement, and emotional detachment, beliefs that allow them to rationalize harm without guilt. In contrast, psychiatrist Dr. Dorothy Ottno-Lewis, famous for studying death row inmates, discovered that many dangerous convicts had neurological impairments, childhood abuse histories, or psychotic symptoms that interacted with environment to form violent tendencies. Her work argued that some monsters are the product of broken brains shaped by broken environments. The debate between choice versus condition continues today. In U.S. prisons, particularly ADX Florence, dubbed the Alcatraz of the Rockies, psychologists observe convicts in extreme isolation. Many inmates there exhibit symptoms of antisocial personality disorder, ASPD, psychopathy, narcissistic rage, or cognitive distortions, dangerous belief systems that twist morality to fit their impulses. Some convicts demonstrate classic psychopathy traits: lack of empathy, superficial charm, manipulation, and emotional numbness. Others show malignant narcissism, where ego injury sparks vengeance. Some display paranoid worldviews, believing violence is self-defense. But the most dangerous share one trait: a mind capable of disconnecting from the humanity of others. Understanding these patterns is crucial, not to excuse crime but to predict, prevent, and decode the psychology of real-world monsters. The psychopath in the cell, Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy remains one of the most analyzed convicts in American history, not only for his crimes, but for his unsettling normalcy. Born in 1946, Bundy initially appeared as a promising young man, intelligent, articulate, politically active, even working at a crisis hotline. Ironically, his early career involved supporting emotionally distressed callers, a sharp contrast to the darkness later uncovered. Bundy exhibited hallmark traits of psychopathy, a neurological condition marked by emotional detachment, impulsivity, and impaired empathy. Psychologist Dr. Robert Hare, creator of the Psychopathy Checklist, PCLR, later used Bundy's behavioral patterns as a real-world reference for psychopathic traits. Bundy's most chilling ability was not aggression, it was masking. He constructed a public persona that functioned like a psychological disguise. This aligns with the concept of psychopathic charm, where individuals mimic emotions cognitively without feeling them internally. He manipulated trust effortlessly, using politeness, vulnerability, and social scripts to lower defenses. His emotional responses were often calculated, not felt, what psychologists call cognitive empathy without effective empathy. Bundy did not experience remorse in the conventional sense. Instead, he used self-serving logic, reframing himself as a victim of circumstance, media bias, or misunderstood impulses. This mirrors Dr. Samnow's theory of criminal thinking patterns, where offenders mentally rewrite reality to protect ego and avoid accountability. Interestingly, psychiatrist Dr. Lewis suspected Bundy also showed signs of malignant narcissism, a dangerous blend of narcissistic ego and psychopathic traits, where violence becomes both impulse and psychological assertion. Bundy once claimed his crimes stemmed from exposure to explicit media. But experts rejected this narrative, emphasizing that millions consume media without committing harm. Bundy chose the excuse, not the cause. While incarcerated, Bundy assisted the FBI in analyzing other violent offenders. His insights were psychologically sharp, reinforcing a key truth: Psychopaths often understand minds better than morals. Bundy's psychology demonstrated that some monsters aren't visibly violent. They are invisible predators hiding behind social fluency. The rage behind the mask, John Wayne Gacy. John Wayne Gacy was the kind of man neighbors described as helpful, community-driven, and entertaining. He ran a construction business, hosted neighborhood cookouts, and even performed at charity events dressed as a clown named Pogo. But beneath the face paint and forced laughter was a mind wired with one of the most dangerous psychological combinations ever studied in American criminal history: antisocial personality disorder fused with explosive narcissistic rage. Psychologists who later reviewed his case pointed out that Gacy showed classic traits of ASPD, a personality structure where rules, consequences, and the emotional suffering of others hold little internal weight. However, unlike the cold emotional distance seen in some psychopaths, Gacy operated through anger, not emotional numbness. His violence was not always calculated, it was fueled by a deep sense of wounded ego and a compulsive need for control. For Gacy, identity was a performance. The clown suit, the handshakes, the smiling businessman persona, they were not expressions of who he was, but psychological props that allowed him to maintain dominance over how others perceived him. Experts call this impression management, a coping mechanism common in dangerous offenders who fear exposure not because they feel guilt, but because they fear losing power. Gacy's psychology thrived on external validation. He wanted to be seen as good but not be good. This is a key distinction in criminal psychology. Some monsters pursue reputation, not morality. In interviews conducted during his incarceration, Gacy repeatedly reframed himself as misjudged, betrayed by society, and targeted by investigators. This aligns directly with criminal cognitive distortion, where the offender becomes the narrator of their own victim story. Instead of acknowledging responsibility, they rewrite the script. I didn't do it, I was forced, they wanted to ruin me, I was misunderstood. His lack of remorse was not silence. It was counter-storytelling, an attempt to psychologically overpower the truth with a version that protected his self-image. Psychiatric evaluations suggested that Gacy also displayed signs of malignant narcissism, a term used to describe individuals who respond to perceived humiliation with hostility and aggression, often seeing others as objects rather than humans. For Gacy, people were not relationships, they were territory. His victims, in his mind, were not individuals but extensions of a world he wanted to command. The danger of malignant narcissism is that violence becomes emotional self-defense, not emotional consequence. Gacy also struggled with emotional regulation. Unlike psychopaths who detach, Gacy imploded. He experienced what psychologists call narcissistic injury, where even mild threats to ego can feel catastrophic. His clown identity was a psychological overcompensation. If I control the stage, no one can unmask me. But that same need for control later turned into something far darker. If I control the person, no one can expose me. While Bundy hid behind charm, Gacy hid behind performance. Bundy manipulated trust. Gacy manipulated perception itself. His psychology revealed a frightening truth. Some monsters don't just deceive you, they entertain you while doing it. Evil in his case wasn't just an act, it was a private empire built beneath a public circus. The most dangerous prison on earth, ADX Florence and the minds it holds. Deep inside the U.S. correctional system lies a place designed not just to contain bodies, but to isolate minds, ADX Florence, the federal supermax prison in Colorado. Unlike traditional penitentiaries, ADX was engineered around a psychological hypothesis. Certain criminal minds are too disruptive, manipulative, or violent to exist in normal social prison environments. So the solution became extreme isolation, routine control, sensory deprivation, and minimal human interaction. Over 70% of inmates at ADX spend 23 hours a day alone, seeing people only through reinforced glass or cell doors. Psychologists studying high-risk offenders note that this environment does not create psychopathy, but it reveals it with brutal clarity. In isolation, there is no audience to charm, no hierarchy to dominate, no group to manipulate, just the convict and their thoughts. For some inmates, this leads to emotional collapse. For others, particularly those with psychopathic or antisocial cognitive wiring, it becomes a stage for mental adaptation, rule exploitation, or psychological warfare with staff. One of the most documented psychological profiles within ADX is the power through proxy thinker. an inmate who cannot control the outside world, so they attempt to control the system they're trapped in. This often manifests through manipulation, legal loophole obsession, or behavioral chess games. Experts observe that many dangerous convicts share a pattern of hyper-rational justification, a belief that morality is flexible, rules are obstacles not boundaries, and consequences are negotiations not deterrents. Another recurring psychological pattern is empathy disengagement, a state where the inmate does not necessarily enjoy suffering, but simply does not register others' emotional reality as relevant. Psychologists differentiate this from emotional numbness. It is more accurately described as emotional irrelevance, the belief that other people's feelings exist, but do not matter to the convict's decision-making system. This trait appears frequently in offenders classified under ASPD, psychopathy, or malignant narcissism. Interestingly, ADX houses convicts whose psychological danger is not emotional emptiness, but emotional explosion. These offenders show narcissistic aggressive loops, where perceived disrespect triggers disproportionate rage. In a normal prison, such individuals recruit followers or intimidate rivals. In ADX, they have no rivals, so the rage often turns inward as psychological resentment toward the system itself. Not remorse. Not reflection. But I was supposed to rule a world, not be locked away by it. Many inmates at ADX also demonstrate identity compartmentalization, the ability to mentally split their actions from self-concept. In their internal narrative, I did bad things but I am not a bad person. This is one of the most dangerous distortions studied in criminal psychology because it allows a person to commit harm without psychologically carrying the emotional cost of believing they are the villain. It protects the ego and frees the impulse. But perhaps the most dangerous psychological trait found among America's most notorious convicts is this. They do not fear being monsters. They fear being powerless. Not all offenders at ADX are the same, but the most dangerous share a chilling mental architecture. Rules are puzzles, not limits. People are variables, not equals. Violence is a tool, not a consequence. Guilt is negotiable, reputation is currency. Control is survival. While society sees ADX as a fortress of steel, psychologists see it as a laboratory of criminal cognition, where the minds of monsters are stripped down to their psychological skeletons, raw, unfiltered, and frighteningly real. The anatomy of a criminal mind, choice, conditioning, and the point of no return. When psychologists analyze America's most dangerous convicts, one conclusion appears again and again: no single factor creates a monster. It is rarely only trauma, only brain chemistry, or only choice. Instead, it is the collision of influences, genetics, environment, cognition, personality wiring, reinforcement, and at a critical moment, a decision that crosses a line most humans never approach. Studies in criminal psychology show that many high-risk offenders develop a mental framework built on 3 pillars. 1. The world versus me narrative. Dangerous offenders often grow up interpreting life as a battlefield where they must dominate or be dominated. This isn't optimism or pessimism, it's hostile attribution bias, a psychological state where neutral events are read as threats. A disagreement becomes betrayal. A boundary becomes war. A consequence becomes persecution. Instead of thinking, I made a mistake, the mind shifts to, they forced my hand. 2. Moral flexibility. Most people see morality as a fixed internal compass. Many dangerous convicts treat it like adjustable logic. Psychologists describe this as ethical drift, where rules and values slowly lose meaning, especially when surrounded by people or environments that normalize dysfunction. Over time, boundaries aren't broken dramatically, they bend quietly, degree by degree, until the person barely notices they've moved. 3. Emotional justification. Some offenders act through emotional emptiness, others through emotional overload. But the most dangerous share a twist. They emotionally justify their actions before committing them. The brain creates permission slips in advance. I deserve this. They would have done worse. No one ever helped me. This is how the world works. This internal negotiation prevents guilt from ever activating fully. It's not a lack of conscience, it's pre-approval of behavior. The point of no return. Psychologists emphasize that most people, even those who experience hardship, never become violent offenders because they retain a key human trait: the ability to mentally link actions to emotional consequence. But for certain dangerous convicts, there comes a moment where identity no longer restrains impulse. Justification outweighs accountability. Control outweighs compassion. Consequences become acceptable risks. and guilt loses the battle to ego protection. This is the threshold event, the moment where criminal cognition crystallizes into action. After that crossing, rehabilitation becomes exponentially harder, not because change is impossible, but because the offender no longer sees their actions as evidence against their self-image. They don't view themselves as monsters. They view themselves as protagonists in a story where violence was a necessary chapter. The bigger lesson. The psychology of America's most dangerous convicts teaches us something vital and real. Evil is rarely announced. It evolves. It rationalizes. It negotiates with itself. And by the time the world notices, the monster believes the story they built was justified long before the harm occurred. Can monsters be rewired? The science of change and the final verdict. When society labels someone a monster, it often sounds like a psychological life sentence. But researchers have spent decades studying a more important question. Can dangerous criminal minds actually change? The answer is not simple, but it is grounded in real science, prison studies, and psychological evaluation. Not fiction, not myth. Experts agree on a key distinction. Not all high-risk convicts are beyond rehabilitation, but the path depends heavily on the type of criminal cognition involved. Psychopathy, ASPD, neurological damage, extreme ego-driven aggression, and cognitive distortion each require different approaches. The brain isn't static. Neuroscience has proven that the human brain has neuroplasticity, the ability to form new neural connections even later in life. This means that behavioral patterns, even harmful ones, are not physically cemented forever. However, in dangerous offenders, the challenge isn't capacity for change. It's willingness to change. Why many don't reform. Studies on U.S. convicts show that the most dangerous offenders often don't believe they are the problem. See consequences as unfair, not corrective. Treat therapy like interrogation, not transformation. Perform remorse instead of feeling it. And fight to preserve their identity, not rebuild it. This psychological resistance is what makes reform difficult, not lack of treatment options. The few who shift. Some inmates who were once considered extremely dangerous have shown progress through cognitive behavioral therapy (CBT), designed specifically for criminal thinking, long-term psychiatric intervention, structured responsibility programs, gradual re-exposure to social environments, emotional accountability training, and deconstruction of the world versus me narrative. These cases are rare but real, proving that monsters aren't always born, they can sometimes be unbuilt. So what is the final conclusion? After analyzing America's most dangerous convicts, prison psychology, and criminal cognitive research, one truth stands above all. A monster is not defined by the worst thing they ever did. A monster is defined by a mind that refuses to connect actions to accountability. Rehabilitation isn't blocked by the brain, it's blocked by belief. And belief, unlike biology, can sometimes be challenged, reshaped, or dismantled. America's most dangerous convicts teach us a chilling but educational lesson. Some criminals hide behind charm. Some hide behind performance. Some hide behind justification. But the most dangerous hide behind a mind that protects its own image at all cost. They aren't terrifying because they look like villains. They're terrifying because they look like humans who mentally disconnected from consequences long before the world noticed. This was not a story of glorifying crime. This was a story of understanding the human mind at its darkest edges. Because the more we understand the psychology of dangerous convicts, the better we become at recognizing the warning signs long before someone crosses the threshold most of us never will. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the human psyche, subscribe to MindSpark Facts, share this video, and keep questioning the world around you, because knowledge is the strongest defense against the unknown.